What if a single destroyer in the Caribbean was carrying out orders based on a policy shift that quietly redefined narcotics smuggling as warfare? On October 3rd, a US Navy ship did exactly that. A Venezuelan go-fast refused to yield, and within minutes 4 people were dead at sea. The US called it lawful interdiction, Caracas called it murder, but the real story is in the authorization. What gave the Navy the green light to pull the trigger at all? Stay tuned, because this new doctrine changes more than tactics. It changes the rules of engagement forever. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It started as a radar blip moving at 38 knots, small, fast, and with no identification signal. At 9:17 that morning, a US Navy destroyer patrolling 25 nautical miles off Venezuela's coast picked it up, a single contact streaking across the screen against an otherwise quiet sea. The Combat Information Center logged it immediately, a bogey with a projected close point of approach under a mile. The duty officer didn't like the pattern. It zigzagged like a go-fast boat, the kind used by traffickers who know how to test borders without crossing them. On the chart, this stretch of water was a narcotics superhighway, linking small island handovers to mainland routes. Within minutes, the contact's track edged closer. 6 cables, 4, then 2, less than 400 yards. Every rule of engagement required warnings, so the destroyer's bridge broadcast its first hail in plain English across international emergency frequencies. Silence. Then another, this time in Spanish. Nothing. The small craft's speed held at 38 knots, its wake cutting sharp white lines across a calm surface. The destroyer held course. Turning away could show weakness, and with Venezuelan patrols nearby, perception mattered as much as position. The seconds ticked down to collision range. The ship's horn thundered, long and low. Deck lights flashed in sequence along the starboard side. Still, the go-fast kept charging on, weaving erratically. Through binoculars, the lookouts could make out 3 figures crouched low inside the hull. No national markings, no response to identification requests. Behind them, the water blurred into a white foam trail, a sign of high fuel burn and heavy throttle use. The captain authorized the next step of escalation, non-lethal deterrence. An MH-60 Seahawk lifted from the destroyer's deck in a whirl of salt spray, its thermal camera locked onto 3 glowing signatures and 2 red-hot engines. At altitude, the pilot fired a magnesium flare streaking bright across the horizon. For a moment, the smugglers slowed, then just as quickly they accelerated again, darting right across the destroyer's bow. The Seahawk responded with a bright green laser pulsing across the cockpit, a standard visual signal meant to disrupt instruments and get attention without inflicting harm. Below, the destroyer launched a rigid hull inflatable boat carrying a boarding team armed and ready. The small craft maneuvered to intercept from the smuggler's flank while the Seahawk hovered overhead. Together they turned the ocean into a tightening triangle, but the smugglers fought to stay ahead. Their boat yawed hard, nearly skimming the RHIB's side as it slipped through a gap no wider than 10 yards. At that speed, even a small collision could shred fiberglass and throw men into the prop wash. Still, the Navy held discipline. The destroyer maintained her bearing. The helicopter tracked every turn. Seconds passed like hours. When the go-fast made another aggressive pass within 2 cables, the engagement officially crossed from non-compliance to hostile intent. The order from the bridge was simple: engage to disable. A single precision round struck the stern, punching through both engines in a controlled blast. Twin plumes of smoke curled into the air. The boat, stripped of power, slowed to a dead float. Within seconds, all heat signatures disappeared on the Seahawk's display. The smoke hung low over the water as the RHIB crew approached the wreck. 4 bodies, motionless. No survivors. The boarding team found fuel drums, navigation equipment, and sealed packages scattered across the deck. They photographed everything, tagged coordinates, and relayed the results back to command. The destroyer's log entry that day labeled it a lawful interdiction under international maritime law, an operation fully documented through radio records, warnings, and escalation protocol. Days before the strike, Washington quietly declared narcotics, trafficking, and armed conflict not a law enforcement issue. The announcement went largely unnoticed outside national security circles, but within the Pentagon, it acted like a switch. President Trump's early October speech described the new phase as war, not crime, not law enforcement, signaling a shift that placed naval command under combat protocols rather than policing ones. The language may have sounded symbolic, but on paper, it turned the Caribbean into an operational theater. Drug cartels, for the first time, were classified alongside armed militias and terror organizations, combatants in a non-state war operating at sea. This new interpretation stripped away the traditional layers of oversight that once slowed decisions. Before this, a Navy ship confronting smugglers usually had to contact legal advisors, coordinate with the Coast Guard, and verify jurisdiction. After the change, commanders gained the right to use force when they determined a threat existed without waiting for clearance. The rules of engagement now treated armed resistance or dangerous maneuvers as hostile acts. That reclassification explained why the destroyer on October 3rd didn't need to pursue capture or seizure first. Its captain had authority to neutralize a vessel once deterrence failed and to record it as an act of defense, not policing. To back this doctrine, Washington staged one of the largest naval concentrations in the Caribbean since the early 2000s. 3 destroyers, a cruiser, a littoral combat ship, and an amphibious ready group joined patrols around sea corridors long known for trafficking. Reinforcements included a guided missile submarine and surveillance aircraft like the P-8 Poseidon, prowling in wide orbits. Officially, their mission targeted counter-narco-terror operations. Unofficially, it served as a deterrent message to any state or group trying to interfere. The Pentagon's warning was blunt. The cartel running Venezuela is strongly advised not to pursue any further effort to obstruct, deter, or interfere. That line left no doubt about who Washington believed was bankrolling the trade. Caracas saw the situation very differently. Venezuelan officials called the boarding of one of their civilian vessels a provocation, arguing the U.S. deployment was meant to justify escalation. Foreign Minister Ivan Gil went further, labeling it part of a failed policy aimed at regime change. To them, every intercept, every inspection, every laser warning was a violation of sovereignty in national waters. Maduro's government maintained that American ships had no legal right to act as judge and executioner offshore. Washington countered with its own narrative, self-defense under international law. Each side claimed legitimacy. And that clash of legal definitions turned routine patrols into acts of confrontation. Behind the rhetoric lay an economic target the US called the conflict economy. Intelligence traced how black market fuel shipments, offshore bank transfers, and spare navigation parts created a shadow chain between smugglers and state-linked entities. When Navy sailors found civilian speedboats carrying military-grade GPS modules and encrypted radios, the evidence supported that view. The implication was simple. Cartels were no longer just criminal groups. They were extensions of networks that enjoyed state protection. By disabling those boats rather than capturing them, the Navy aimed to choke off a system rather than just seize drugs. Every strike sent a signal to financiers and suppliers who hid behind complex logistics, tankers, and front companies. An earlier mission, weeks before the October interdiction, had already tested the policy. On September 12th, a U.S. Navy patrol aircraft tracked a flotilla south of Puerto Rico. Smugglers reportedly opened fire when approached, triggering a rapid strike that left 11 dead. The episode didn't reach headlines, but it provided justification for subsequent actions. Within Navy briefings, it became the model of decisive interdiction, swift, final, and legal under warfighting rules. The October 3rd interdiction proved how one shift in doctrine can reshape naval authority at sea, erasing the old boundaries between smugglers, soldiers, and sovereigns. That single shot exemplified Washington's new belief that trafficking equals warfare. Each strike now sends a message louder than any press release, forcing nations to redraw their rules before the ocean does it for them. So what do you think? Does calling narcotics war reinforce security or pull the region deeper into confrontation? The next encounter might not involve 4 traffickers, but 2 governments facing each other across a contested line of blue water.